Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Bradley Ludke, and I will be your moderator. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth webinar in our five-part series, The 5 C's of Knowledge Management. This session is Part 4, Collaborate. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadrastar. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Stan Garfield. Stan is a respected knowledge management practitioner, author, speaker, and community leader. He has provided us with many great webinars that are listed on our website, so please feel free to check those out after today's session. Please take it away, Stan.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks to everybody for joining today's webinar. We're at the fourth stage of our five-part series on the 5 C's of knowledge management, and today the focus is on the fourth C, collaborate. What do we mean by collaboration? The term gets used a lot, probably a lot of time not that much thought of what's involved, but what I think of collaboration being as interacting with peers and with colleagues to exchange ideas, share experiences, work together on projects, solve problems together, and provide assistance to one another. There is, in fact, a business need for collaboration. It's not just a nice to have. Organizations need collaboration within their work units, in project teams, and in communities that span organizational boundaries. And organizations need consistent ways of sharing their knowledge across the organization. They need ways to coordinate the activities of members of these different teams and communities, and they need efficient ways of communicating with one another, and collaboration allows that to happen. It's important that to enable collaboration within an organization, that you think carefully about how you want it to work and provide some standards so that people who wish to collaborate have something to start with, to use, to go on. You can help this by providing standards for the processes used for collaboration, providing standard tools for collaboration so that people aren't all trying to use different ones and unable to connect with one another, and standard templates for those that are using the tools to make it easier and faster to get started in using them. This ensures that people will not have to learn new tools over and over again. If you keep changing your collaboration tools, that'll be frustrating to your users. Once they've learned a tool and are comfortable with it, they'll want to keep using it. You don't want to deal with incompatibility, where if every department chooses its own collaboration tool, that might work well within that department, but it will work against collaborating across departments. And you don't want to have to recreate the essentials. You don't want someone to have to invent a new template for a project team each time a new project starts up. You'd like to provide them with a standard template that they can use so they can get right into it and not have to reinvent the wheel. So today we'll talk about use cases for collaboration. We'll talk about team collaboration and collaborating in communities, and we'll finish up by talking about working out loud. It's important when you talk collaboration to define the use cases for it. If you just tell people you want them to collaborate, that won't be enough. They won't know exactly what you expect of them. They won't be able to take advantage of what you might have in mind. So I created this acronym based on the word collaboration to come up with 13 different use cases, all of which are part of effective collaboration, and we'll go through each of the 13. The first is communicate, to inform an organization about activities and plans and progress, to have interaction between colleagues, to solicit input, feedback, and advice from people across the organization, and also to be able to relax and refresh and to relieve tension. Sometimes we forget that all work and no play can cause stress. And to relieve some of that, communication can supplement our work-related communication with less formal communication that allows people, for instance, to communicate or collaborate around interests and hobbies. And that can be a good thing for encouraging people to use collaboration tools because they can use them not only for work, but also for their interests. Obtain means gaining assistance from others, finding out what others are doing, retrieving information, and receiving answers to questions. So if you're using collaboration for these use cases, then when you need something, we need some help, you can go and get it. Locate means to find subject matter experts, to find documents and references, to locate websites, to come up with official methods, and have a way to find lessons learned, proven practices, and any other resources that you need in order to do your job. Learning means understanding a topic in depth, deepening expertise, and keeping current on the latest news. So collaboration certainly can enable learning because people can be connected to each other and learn from each other and learn at the time of need and through experience. Assist is responding to a request, responding to a proposal, request for proposal, request for information, a request for help or support. Assist is submitting a proposal, delivering a product, project, service, or a client engagement, or providing thought leadership. Build is to develop thought leadership, or to write a document, or create a presentation, or to develop a product or service. Offer is to answer questions, provide points of view, proven practices, lessons learned, other examples and methods, to get staffed on a project or on a client engagement, to lead an effort, to praise, recognize, or thank a colleague. So, for example, in an organization where people are trying to remain busy and want to get staffed on a project, collaboration is one way for them to make an offer to say, I'm available, I have these skills, and I would like to be placed on a project. So connecting people who have a need to be placed with those who need to staff a project is one function of collaboration. Resolve means to identify issues and to solve problems and to fix something that's broken. Collaboration certainly is an excellent way of doing this because you can connect with someone that you may not know in advance, but through social networks and communities, locate them, and they can help you solve a problem that you wouldn't otherwise be able to solve by yourself. If you have to ask questions, request advice, submit a query, or make a form of request, collaboration is an excellent way of doing that by asking in a social setting rather than doing it on a one-to-one basis. You know, people are sort of used to going and asking a person that they know, somebody that sits next to them. It's not nearly as effective as if you're able to ask in a much broader environment where the people who might be able to help you are out there, but you don't know who they are in advance. Now, transfer is sharing links and insights and lessons learned, tips, tricks, and techniques. Is contributing reusable content that other people can then reuse. So now it's transfer is one important use of collaboration. Innovation, which is developing new and better ways of serving clients, new and better ways of doing things inside of an organization. It's a way of soliciting ideas, managing an innovation process, improving existing products, services, processes, and tools, and inventing new ones, right? So innovation is something I believe that all organizations wish they could do better. Collaboration allows you to do better by using its capabilities in order to do the things listed here. Onboarding, which is to bring new hires or new team members on board to help get oriented as a new hire or a new team member, or it is to orient new clients to your products and services. Certainly, collaboration in this sense means helping people to better understand what's expected of them, give them the resources that they need in order to do their jobs when they're starting out. And the final letter of collaboration N is for network, connecting to others with similar interests, working together as part of a team, and connecting multiple organizations to deliver service as one organization. And certainly that second point there, working together, that is really what the definition of collaboration is. So we finally got to that particular one in this last of the 13 use cases. But you can see that all of them collectively are fairly extensive. There's a rich set of functionality we're talking about here that collaboration can enable. So that's why it's never as simple as just saying we should collaborate. You have to get into the use cases and the ones that are in particular value to your organization. Now that we've defined the use cases for collaboration, let's talk about the different instances, different ways in which we can enable collaboration as part of a knowledge management program. First off is collaborating in teams. We'll talk about team spaces and group chat, web conferences, and having a standard process for collaboration. A team space is a tool that's been around now for some time. A good example of it historically has been Microsoft SharePoint, but there are other similar tools that allow teams to share documents, to share their schedules and their files. They can conduct meetings, they can conduct surveys and polls, they can store the minutes of their meetings, store the reports, store their plans, store any other deliverables that are important to that team. Now, before we had tools like SharePoint, collaborating within a team was done on a more ad hoc basis. It might have been done through email. Before there was email, it probably would have been done through pieces of paper being circulated. But we now have the means to do it more efficiently than we did before the existence of tools. And so the idea here is that teams should take advantage of these so they can work more effectively as a team. And then we'll talk about some other ways that you can enable that. But the idea of having some predefined tools and processes and templates can really help this team collaboration operate much more effectively. If you're going to have team spaces that you offer to your project teams, here's some guidelines for making those effective. You should make it fast and easy to create a team space using a self-service intranet site. So it shouldn't be hard to do. It shouldn't require that they have to go through some other body and wait. You want a project team that's starting up to be able to get started right away. So you should offer a way for them to do that by filling in a few simple things in a form and then getting their team site created. You should have some rules for which allowable file types and backup frequency and storage quotas. So if you have rules, let people know what those rules are so they can use the team spaces in the right way. You can define the team members and provide access for each of them. So the team should be defined as who is in it. The team space should be set up to limit access to it to those team members. You should have a team roster page where people know who all the other team members are. You should establish rules that all the files that will be shared within the team space, not by sending them through an email attachment, not through sending them through group chat, not through some other mechanism, some ad hoc or some external file thing like Dropbox. But no, the standard should be we're going to share our files here and only here. You can set up recurring meetings in the team space. You should allow users to subscribe to alerts to be notified when new documents are posted. You can use polls to conduct surveys, take votes, make decisions. Discourage team collaboration from taking place outside the team space. And finally, create a process for file retention, archiving, wire sharing, and deletion. So if you have those guidelines in place, then it will make it easy for teams that want to use a project team space to do so. Group chat has become much more prevalent for tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams. It reduces the need for face-to-face meetings where people can communicate in asynchronous fashion. It enables a more natural flow of information, and you can share critical information instantly. But a caution, group chat is not good for community discussion. So if you're using it that way, I encourage you to use some other tool. Stick with group chat for teams to communicate and use other tools that we'll talk about later for community discussions. Web conferences, which we're all familiar with now through the use of tools like Zoom and Google Meet and Microsoft Teams, are pretty widespread. We're all pretty familiar with them now, but they provide the ability for us to collaborate across distance. So you can have a virtual meeting room, you can do online conferencing, you can do video conferencing, and then if you take it to a further extent, there's something called telepresence, which creates much more of a real feel to being in the same place, even though you're in different places, with high fidelity cameras and tools that make it look as if you're next to each other. That's a way of doing video conferencing in a more simulated form of being in person. And meeting in person is still valuable. That's something I'll stress. Despite all of these nice tools we have for meeting remotely, there's really no substitute for meeting in person at least some of the time because of the other interactions, the other cues that we get for meeting in person. So I would say we're going to probably continue to meet virtually most of the time, but if you can get your team together some of the time in person, even if the team is geographically dispersed. That's very powerful. To enable collaboration within an organization, I mentioned it's good to have a standard process. So what's part of that is to have a policy that says, for example, all project teams will use this tool for their projects. You should have a procedure for them to follow that says when you're starting up a new project, here's how you create your team space, here's how you're supposed to use it during the time of the project, here's how you're supposed to close it down at the end. You should provide a standard tool that everyone uses so they're not using a variety of them. There should be standard templates for the different types of teams. So if you're doing a customer project, there should be a standard template for that. If you're doing an internal task force, there should be a template for that, and so forth. For however many types of teams that there are, you should have a template defined in advance for each one so that it makes it easy for those teams to get started, and most of what they need will already be there and they don't have to recreate it. You should offer predefined training for using these team spaces and support for people that need help. And then the last point has to do with what do you do with content in a team space that could have more wide value. And that would be to have a capture process that allows reusable content to be selected from team spaces and then submitted to appropriate repositories for later reuse. So if you're using a Microsoft SharePoint team site and there's content in there that you think could be more widely used, then there should be a fairly simple way for it to be taken out of that team space, which is restricted in access to just the team members, and contributing it into a more open and public repository. Now we'll talk about collaborating in communities. Communities are groups of people who share a concern, a set of problems, a passion about a topic, something that unites them, that causes them to wish to come together and deepen their understanding of the topic through discussions, through meetings, and through building trusting relationships with other members of the community. Members in a community typically post and reply to an online threaded discussion, and they share information with one another. They ask and answer questions. They find expertise and resources, and they solve problems together. So that certainly sounds like many of our collaboration use cases. So community is an extremely important part of collaboration. I've defined 10 principles for successful communities I'd like to go through now. These are principles that some people might question. I've had people question them before, but these are based on my experience in leading communities and being part of communities over many years. In fact, they come from a document that I wrote 15 years ago called the Communities Manifesto that had these 10 principles in it with additional details about each one. But I'll go through each one of them here so you understand the principles. The first is that communities should be independent of the organization structure. So many organizations will try to have communities that are exactly the same as the org structure. They'll have communities whose names are the names of different work units or different practices within a consulting firm or different work teams or org structures. And the idea of that is, well, that seems to make sense. We have this work structure, let's have a community called that. But in fact, that's not what communities are really for. Communities are designed to be different than work structures, to allow people to collaborate across organizational boundaries, and they should be independent of the org structure because communities end up being things that people choose to participate in. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. Communities are different from teams. If you're in a team, it's because you generally have been assigned to it. Either that's the work unit that you were hired into, or it's a project team that you were asked to be a part of, or it's some kind of a task force that you volunteered to be on. Whatever it is, a team has a finite membership, generally has a specific purpose, and it generally has a finite length of time. So a community is not. A community is not any of those things. Community is just people that choose to join, and it doesn't match up with any particular organization, and it doesn't necessarily have any specific purpose other than the things we mentioned about the members benefiting from being part of the community. So it has a different role than what a team is. Communities are also not sites or team spaces or blogs or wikis or any other tool. Sometimes people refer to a tool as a community. A tool can be very important in supporting a community, but it's not the community. The community is the people who are in it, and the tools support those people. So if you ever hear somebody refer to a site and say that site is our community, that might be the site for the community, but it is not the community. Community leadership and membership should be voluntary, meaning that people can be in the community or not based on their own personal wish. So if you encounter a situation where either you're assigned into a community or people are involuntarily added to a community, generally it doesn't work well because people may resent that. They didn't ask to be part of that community. They feel like they already are busy with work-related tasks, and this seems like something extra and they didn't ask for it. But if you volunteer to be in a community, then you aren't going to complain about what the activities are because you chose to be a part of it. So there's a big difference there. Same thing is true of leadership of a community. Communities need effective leaders. That's one of the points, point 9. But you can't make somebody be a community leader. They have to want to be the community leader. It takes time, effort, but most of all, it takes passion. The community leader should want to do that and should have enthusiasm for doing that. So you want somebody to volunteer to be the community leader. You might ask for volunteer. You might try to solicit somebody to take over community, but you shouldn't force them to do that. If you do that, they probably aren't going to do a good job of leading it. They'll just do the minimum. Number 5, communities should span boundaries. What we mean by that is that they aren't all within one vertical organization structure. They cut across those. So if you have different business units, if you have different functions, if you have different parts of the organization that report into different leaders, communities should have members from all of those different groups so that they're not just one organization and not just led by one, but they cut across. So organization boundary spanning means letting people who have different leaders, different responsibilities, and perhaps different skill sets and experiences to come together in the community. And that's one of the powerful benefits of the community. By bringing together all those diverse people and diverse organizations and backgrounds, you get far more value from the community than if it was all from one organization or from one region or from one location. You should minimize redundancy in communities. This can be difficult to achieve because people tend to like to create their own. But if you're leading a community's program as part of knowledge management, then one of your goals should be to have only one community for every important topic, not more than one. Now, why is that? Why wouldn't you want to have lots of different communities? The reason is, if you have lots of different communities, then you're not going to get the benefits out of having everyone in the same place. There may be useful information shared in one community that's not then shared in the other. That people who would otherwise benefit from hearing from one another won't because they're in different places. It's frustrating to potential members who attempt to join communities because they don't know which one to join. If they're presented with a list of 10 communities all on the same subject, they'll get frustrated by that. They may not join any of them. So you'd really rather present them with a very simple choice. Here's the one community, and then all the people anywhere in our entire organization who have an interest in that topic are in this community. You don't have to go and find them in some other one. So a single community for every important topic is far more valuable than having more than one for each topic. Communities need a critical mass of members. What do we mean by that? It means that if you have a small community, it's unlikely to be successful. Why is that? It's because there's a rule of thumb called the 90% rule. 90 is also known as the 99-1, where 90% of a community are unlikely to ever post anything. 9% of the community will post maybe once or twice or a little bit, and 1% will post frequently. Given that fact, if you have a small community of 10 people, then if you go with the 1% rule, well, 1% is 0, essentially, if you round down. And if you have even the 10% is one person, well, one person posting in a community isn't adequate for it to sustain. So if you get up to 100, you're much better off. With 100 members, then 10% is 10 different people posting, and 1% is one person. And if you get above 100, if you get up to 1,000, now you're really getting a lot of diverse set of people posting, and you're getting more activity. If you go with the small community, it might get started, but it will tend to fizzle out over time because of the lack of people posting. So What's a good number for critical mass? Well, based on some research that I participated in, we found that actually 200 was a pretty good number. If you got a community up to 200 and above, it tended to have a good chance of continuing and succeeding. You could certainly do it with a smaller number, but the smaller the number, the less likely that it will stay active. Communities should start with as broad a scope as is reasonable. You run into communities that want to be very narrowly defined. But the problem with that is that you really don't get the critical mass then. So what you want to do is pick a topic that's not too broad. You can't have a topic that encompasses everything, because that's not going to allow the community to define itself. But you also don't want it to be too narrow where only a handful of people care about the topic. So find that sweet spot in between. And when in doubt, start with a broader topic. And if over time it turns out that it's too broad, you can always narrow it by splitting the community into more than one community, and that way you can get down to the right granularity. But start with as broad a scope as is reasonable. If that works, you're fine. If over time you find that it's too noisy, there's too much volume of activity, you can split it up. But seldom does that actually happen. Typically, if you get it right, you got it right the first time, it stays that way. Communities need to be actively nurtured. We mentioned that community leadership should be voluntary. The leader who leads that community actually has to spend time and energy leading the community. It's not just enough to be declared community leader. The community leader has to actually spend time holding events, stimulating conversation, attracting new members, doing things that create the community's vibrant energy that keep it going. And communities can be created, led, and supported using Target. That's an acronym that I'll show now in the next slide. So what do we mean by target? We mean these categories here, each of which has its own acronym. So target stands for types, activities, requirements, goals, expectations, and tools. The first one helps you describe the type of community that you're creating. Typical community is based on topic, that's the most common, but you can also have communities that are based on roles, such as project management community, based on audiences. If the community is oriented, let's say, towards new hires, that could be the audience of the community. It could be based on an industry. You might have a community for the telecommunications industry, or it could be based on location. Typically don't encourage location-based communities, but it might be useful if the community is about that location. So if the community is to talk about the foods of Canada, then that can be a location-specific community. Activities, these are the things that you want members of the community to do. If they ask you what do you expect them to do in the community, you can tell them space. We want you to subscribe to get updates from the threaded discussions. We want you to post if you have something to share. We want you to attend our calls. We want you to contribute content to the community. And we want you to engage with the other members and with our regular events like community calls. Requirements. This is what a community needs to have for it to be successful. It needs to have a subject that's been carefully chosen. It needs to have members who are willing to join, so you reach critical mass. It needs to have interaction between the members. It needs to have leaders who can spend time and energy on leading the community. And it needs enthusiasm from the members and from the leader so that it will sustain. The goals for communities, if you're leading a communities program, it's good to set some goals for each one. They can be the participation rate, that the community is active enough and it's not dead. There can be anecdotes collected from the community members showing how it's valuable to them, that you have the necessary tools to support the community, that the coverage across the different organizations is there. It's not just siloed within one. And the health of the community. Is it staying alive? Is it active? Is it vibrant? Are people in it getting benefit from it? Expectations for communities. For the community leader, this is what you want the community leader to do. The shape activities, to schedule events and host those events, to make sure that questions receive answers, to post occasionally so that the pump is primed and people see good examples of what should be discussed, and to expand the community by getting new members and expanding the content that's available through the community. And finally, the tools that support communities are a site for the community where people can find out about it and join it, a calendar of events, the actual events that get held, news about the community might be in the form of a newsletter, and the online threaded discussions, which are typically the most important tool of the community. 5 critical success factors for communities are a compelling topic, one that people will identify with and be incented to join. They want to see that they want to get in that community. They see that it exists and other people are in it and the topic's important and they want to join it. A critical mass of members, we've mentioned that a critical mass usually gets above 100. A committed leader who's willing to spend the time necessary to do the shape activities that I mentioned. Host regular events so people have a call or a meeting and have active online discussions. If these things are all taking place, you probably have a thriving community. For the community leader, here are 10 actions they can take to lead a community. They can carefully choose the community's topic so that it's one that will last and people will identify with and wish to join. They can publicize the community widely so people are aware of it so they can join it. Take steps to increase the membership, both initially and then on an ongoing basis over time. Post and reply in the threaded discussions to both prime the pump and set the example for the members as to what this should look like. To publish and distribute a monthly community newsletter. This can be highlights from the month. It could be a summary of the monthly call. It could be pointed to some of the lively discussions that are going on so people are reminded of them and directed there. Scheduling and hosting community events, providing some useful content to the community, telling community members how they should participate. So we saw before what those activities were. Setting goals and measuring progress for the community. And then soliciting, finding, and publicizing success stories about the community. So a good community leader does all 10 of these things. And if they do that, the community probably will be in good health and will be able to keep going indefinitely. Here's an example of a community. This is one that I lead. It's called the SICAM Leaders Community. I formed this community back in 2005, so it's now been in existence for 18 years. The membership has continued to grow over all 18 years. Right now, we're over 1,100 members in the community. And this is the site for it. It's based on a tool called groups.io. You can join the community if you're interested. You can join. It's open to anyone interested in the field of knowledge management. And when you go there, you'll find that we have very lively discussions going on online at most times. We have a monthly call with a featured speaker, and there are other resources available through the community. So it doesn't have to take a lot to do a community, just a site, ability to have online discussions, and ability to have regular meetings. And if you got those things, you can go off and running. We'll talk about some tools that we use to collaborate in communities, starting with threaded discussions, and we'll talk about wikis and events. Threaded discussions are forums for carrying on discussions on a specific subject. And they offer the ability to have online, mobile, or email posts and replies, to have searchable archives, and they group the discussions into threads so you can see the complete history of that discussion by topic. So they're better than carrying them on through an email exchange, because email exchanges get all kind of out of sync with one another and it's hard to go back and look through them. What you can do in threaded discussions, you can share, you can ask, find, answer, recognize a colleague, inform about your activities, or suggest ideas. These actions are best carried on in threaded discussions. If you try to do them in some other way, you could do them, but they wouldn't work as well. So for instance, if you're asking a question, there's probably no better place to ask it than in a community's threaded discussion, because all the potential people who might answer it are probably members of that community and then can respond to you. So if you have any of these 7 actions that you're doing, you should be directed towards the threaded discussion as a place to do them. Wikis are websites that allow users to easily add content and remove content and edit content. They're effective for collaborative writing where more than one person is participating in the writing. You can use them for self-service website creation. So instead of having to go through an official web developer, you can make it so that anyone can create their own website. And then they can also take care of their own website, not have to go through a maintainer. So they're a good tool for letting people do their own thing and letting more than one person get in on the editing of a website. The wikis typically include version control, so you can go back and see previous versions. You can see what's changed from one version to the next. They often have a talk function where people can discuss the contents of a page and what's going on and why it changed. And they have automatic hyperlinks, so that instead of having to spend time figuring out what to link one page to, if you just put in a word and put it within brackets, it can automatically figure out that that's a link to another wiki page. So it's pretty easy to use. It has a lot of potential benefit. However, what I found through my experience over time is that wikis have never really caught on as much with the masses as we might have hoped. So there's typically a few wiki enthusiasts who will be using them, but not necessarily all the other people that they had hoped would participate in the editing. Same thing is true in the internet with Wikipedia. Everyone is familiar with using Wikipedia, but few people are actually editing wiki pages in Wikipedia. The use cases for community wikis are to collaborate on planning the agenda for a meeting. So if you want to work on a meeting agenda, why not put it in a wiki, let everybody edit it together, and you get done much more quickly than if you tried sharing a document and sending it around. You can compile the minutes from a meeting in a wiki, and multiple people can contribute to those minutes. You can provide a list of resources that can be updated and corrected by anyone. So you don't have to say, come to me for the change. You can say, make the change yourself. You can capture and maintain a body of knowledge that will evolve through iteration. You can be the one that starts it, but other people can come and add to it and modify it. You can collect, enhance, and maintain reference information for a community. So not only the community leader, but all the community members can participate in that reference information. You can create an outline that we've fleshed out over time via a variety of subject matters. So you could start with the broad outline, then tell the community, hey, will you come and help fill it in? And different members can fill in different parts of the outline. Eventually, it gets fleshed out with a fairly complete and robust set of content. You can enable employees to create and collaboratively edit their own content pages, so that, once again, rather than having to go through some kind of controlling entity, you can say you can do it yourself. You can encourage users to collaboratively edit community support pages. So whatever support's being provided, you can say, here are the various things that we're working on, or here are some problems that we're solving, and let everybody participate in editing those and maintaining them. You can brainstorm to come up with new ideas, and you can achieve consensus on a topic. For example, if you're drafting a new policy, you could have everybody participate in the drafting of that policy, and eventually then you can say it's locked and finished. Community events can include meetings, peer assists, and knowledge cafes. A community meeting is good for building trust within communities. We can allow the members to deepen relationships. So going beyond threaded discussions, community meetings get more of a personal interaction. You can use the threaded discussions to help with the meetings. They can help publicize it. You can have the discussion that started in a meeting continue on a threaded discussion. And then you can use team spaces to hold the calendars, the meeting agendas, the slides, recordings, the group chat transcripts. So they can be set up so that there's a new page for each meeting, and each page has these content items in it. And then it's easy to go back to a previous meeting and find all of the content from that meeting. A peer assist is when a team of people working on a project call a one-day meeting and seek knowledge and insights from people on other teams. It brings together a group of peers, they elicit feedback on a problem or a project or activity, and it draws lessons from the participants' knowledge. In community, the peer assist can be done as a shorter virtual event. So you could do an online meeting using a tool like Zoom and have a peer assist done that way. And some of the, we've had examples of that in the community that I led, the SICAM leaders. So a peer assist is a viable activity that you might choose to use as part of your meetings. A knowledge cafe is a conversational process that brings a group of people together so they can share experiences and learn from each other. They can build relationships, and they can make better sense of what's going on in the world. The process for a knowledge cafe is you pick a subject, you have an initial brief presentation about that subject, then you break up into groups. If you're held in person, these are at different tables, and if it's virtual, they are breakout rooms. The participants take turns talking about the topic, and then they rotate to a different table or breakout room, and they do this several times. They rotate several times, and they gain many different perspectives from those discussions each time they rotate. So we'll wrap up by talking about working out loud. Working out loud is a concept that's been around for a little while. It hasn't really caught on as much as might have thought that it would have, but it is a process that I encourage you to consider using within your organization. It combines the concept of observable work which is creating spaces where others can engage with your content, and narrating your work, which is posting about what you're doing in social software. So these two concepts, observable work, meaning that you're open and public and anyone can see what it is that you're doing, and narrating your work, which is you're telling people about what you're doing so they're keeping up to date about it. So those two concepts are very important to the concept of working out loud. Now, this goes against the way many of us historically have worked. Organizations tend not to work this way inherently. They tend to be more closed, not open, more secretive, more operating on a need-to-know basis. I'm the person in charge, and I'll tell a select few people about something, but I don't want everybody knowing what's going on. Working out loud flips that around and says the more that you can let the entire organization in on what you're thinking, doing, the more that those other people will feel empowered, engaged, energized, but also have a chance to contribute. And so this concept requires you to probably have to work through resistance, where people will think, why would we want to do that? But we'll talk through some of the reasons why you would want to do that and the benefits that can come from it. So here is a chart, comes from John Stepper, called The 5 Elements of Working Out Loud. It talks about relationships, which is the heart, sort of at the heart of working out loud. Relationships between people. Relationships are a path of knowledge between people. Generosity, where we're hired for our reciprocal altruism. So the currency of real networking is generosity, right? The idea that we are going to share not because we expect something back, but because we feel like it's the right thing to do. Visible work, which is amplifying what you are and what you do, letting other people see what you're doing, which means that you're making yourself vulnerable, but that also people will appreciate that, and they may be able to benefit from seeing what you're working on, and they may be able to offer you something as a result. The fourth is purposeful discovery. So you have a learning goal in mind, and you orient your activities towards, I'm going to find out information, I'm going to learn, I'm going to benefit from that. And then a growth mindset, where you're curious, you're open-minded, you're looking to expand, you're not closed in. So a growth mindset. If you combine these 5 elements, this is how John helps to explain working out loud. I've come up with 8 reasons that I think are important for working out loud. Let's go through them. The first is that multiple people may need to know what is going on, and you may not know all of them, right? If you try to share on a need-to-know basis with a limited number of people, you may miss somebody who actually should know what is going on, but doesn't, because you either didn't know about them or you neglected to include them. When you're working out loud, that doesn't happen because anyone can find out what you're doing. Second is providing transparency in thinking and in decisions and in processes allows you to receive inputs and feedback from anyone willing to contribute. Now, you might be reluctant to receive that kind of feedback, but once again, if you have the growth mindset and you're open to that, then if someone says to you, I've seen what you're working on, I think you might benefit from this. Instead of resisting that and telling people to mind their own business, if you think, oh, wow, that could be very helpful to me, and you appreciate that, it's probably going to be to your benefits, right? So the fact that serendipity can come into play, the next point, where you didn't expect to receive this feedback or didn't expect this person to volunteer to help, but it ends up helping you, you can exploit that. So serendipity, the idea that you don't know in advance what might be helpful to you. You don't know in advance who might be interested in seeing what you're working on, but you allow for that. You enable serendipity by working out loud. The fourth point is you allow others to benefit from seeing discussions instead of keeping them closed, including receiving advice from unexpected sources based on someone who has relevant experience but that you didn't know about. or receiving pointers to useful information. Somebody sees what you're working on and says, hey, here's an article I think you should read, or here's a website that contains some useful information for you. And helping others to learn and develop. They may not offer you any help at all, but they may learn from what you're doing, and it'll help them to get better at what they're doing, and that's all to the good for the company that you're in, right? If someone sees what you're doing and then allows them to do their work better, that helps both of you because you're both part of the same organization. That helps the organization do better as a whole. The fifth point is you can keep an open record of discussions and maintain a single thread. So you need to go back and find out, what did we talk about and when, and how do we make that decision, and when did that happen? By doing this consciously, that won't be a hard thing to do. You'll know exactly where to go look, and you probably can easily search for that. Versus if you didn't use a tool as part of your ongoing work, if it was a combination of this email and that chat and this phone call and this scrap of paper, there's no coherent record of what went on. And it'd be hard to reconstruct. It might be hard for you to find. And we've all had the experience of trying frantically looking around for a piece of paper that we remembered somewhere that had something written on it. Well, this is a way of not having to go through that. Number 6 is it helps to build your personal brand. Now, I had one critic of this claim that this was the only benefit of working out loud, but clearly it's not. It's just one of 8. But there is a personal benefit. If you're doing a good job of letting other people know what you work on and letting them see you in action, then they'll be more aware of you, and that may help your individual career. Someone who would otherwise know you can say, I see you're doing good work and like to tap into that. It might lead to a job opportunity. It might lead to being asked to be on a task force. It might lead to being invited to attend a conference. There are a lot of things that could happen that are beneficial to you, and you will actually then get better known as a result. Is that a selfish thing? I don't think it's inherently selfish. I just think it's a benefit that comes from working out loud. And I can say personally from my own career as working in the field of knowledge management, I've always believed in sharing publicly and openly, and I haven't found that that's been a bad thing. People have benefited from it, so it's not just a selfish thing, but I've also benefited because I made lots of contacts, and people have asked me to speak and to write and to be present at events and so forth. So it works both ways. The sharing helps the other people, and it has also helped me. So it does help build your personal brand. Number 7, it avoids fragmentation into different email threads and different sets of people. And this is a common problem. It gets not just for working out loud, but for all of collaboration, that where we're not using the same open approaches, if we're fragmented, if we're using different tools, if we're using private groups or private email threads, then we're not getting the full benefit we might get if we were more open. There might be other things that could happen if we let more people see what we're doing. We might reach people who could benefit. We might reach people who could help us. So by avoiding that fragmentation into these different threads and different people, we can benefit from doing it more openly. And the final point is we can progress from the old ways of working to the new. So I mentioned that people might resist this. So it's not like you're going to go into an organization and say, hey, let's start working out loud. Everybody will say, sure. Instead, you'll probably find people will be skeptical. But if you can help them through it by explaining some of these reasons, by showing it in action, by being the first one to work out loud and letting them see how it works, then you can have a story to go with it about how it benefited you and others. And that can help others then progress from the way they traditionally worked into working in new and better ways. So, collaborating effectively means that we move from a need-to-know basis to a need-to-share basis. So what do we mean by this? This is where we're going to wrap up the webinar, but let me talk a little bit about this, because I think this gets to many of the concepts we've talked about on this webinar. A need-to-know basis traditionally meant that we kept information very close to the vest, tightly secured, only shared it reluctantly with a few people. So we'd say, I'm only sharing with you because I believe you need to know, or you're my superior, or I've been ordered to share it with you. That's the way typically the military worked. That's the way other organizations have worked. So plenty of us are familiar with that kind of an approach. And there was benefits to that. It's not without reason. If you shared things that shouldn't have been shared, it could cause harm, could be dangerous. But you have to ask yourself, are we going too far with that? What is the harm of sharing? And this is where I often get into discussions with people who wanted to create private collaboration groups. they would explain to me they just wanted these specific subset of people to be part of that. And I'd ask them, what's the harm of someone outside of that group from belonging to it? And usually there wasn't a good answer to it, right? Because they really weren't setting it up to discuss highly confidential information. They just didn't want outsiders to be a part. That's sort of a normal human emotion, but it isn't one that's good for supporting collaboration and knowledge sharing. So you have to try to help them through that to say, if you create this as a private group, only the few people that you allow into it will get any benefit out of it. But if you open it up to more people, there's potential for not only your hand-picked group to benefit from those other people who will have things to contribute, but you're also going to have lots of benefit to all those other people who wouldn't otherwise be able to participate. So I'll give you an example of this. When I was working at one organization, we had a knowledge management team that I was part of, and they had a Yammer group that was private. It was set up to be just for the members of that organization, no one else. And the idea was, well, it's just for us, and therefore we can talk about things that are just for us to talk about. Now, if you stop and think about that, how often would that group, the entire organization, have confidential discussions? Probably never, right? Because if there truly were sensitive discussions, they wouldn't take place across the entire organization. They'd be done in private amongst a few people, and it wouldn't be done in the full organization Yammer group. But there are lots of other people who didn't work in that knowledge management organization who could have benefited from what we were talking about there, because much of our discussion was about general topics of knowledge management that weren't specific to our organization, but which anyone could have benefited from. And so I persuaded, after some time and some effort, I persuaded the leader of the organization that we could try opening up the group from being closed and limited to just the 200 members of our knowledge management organization to the entire company. And when we did that, it was interesting to observe, because I always say the way to test things out is to actually try them and see what happens. It's possible that I would have argued for that, we opened it up, and no one else joined. That would have shown that my argument was false. But that was not the case. Once we opened it up, it expanded by a factor of 10. Before long, there were 2,000 members of this Yammer group, all of whom were previously banned from being a part of it because it was private, and now they could all participate in the group. Now, did they all start flooding the group with posts? No, because as I said, 90% of any group isn't going to post anyway. But the 90% are nonetheless going to benefit because they're able to see what's being discussed in the group, and that's the primary benefit of any collaborative group. It's the people who are learning from it. So by opening it up from a need-to-know basis, we then made it far more useful to our company by allowing everyone else interested in knowledge management in, and they could read and pay attention and learn, and if they wanted to, they could also contribute, or they could even ask us questions. They might ask what our group was doing so that they could benefit from knowing that. So that's an example of going from a need-to-know basis to a need-to-share basis, and certainly working out loud is one extreme example of that, where you not only talk about certain topics in communities, but you actually do your work in a visible way. And I had one friend who worked at another company who demonstrated this by actually having a whiteboard outside his office where he would write on there everything that he was working on. Anybody could walk by his office and see it, including people that worked in other teams. And he was then essentially practicing what he preached. He wanted people to work out loud, and he did. And he set the example that others could follow and how they could also work out loud. So if you think about knowledge management, what is it primarily about? It's about sharing things that we know with others so they can effectively reuse them, right? That's what we're really about in knowledge management. And through that process, we're able to learn, we're able to innovate, we're able to make progress within the missions of our organization. So at its core, knowledge management wants to allow people to share. It wants to allow people to be open. If you encounter cases where people say they want to do knowledge management, but they want to do it on a closed basis, on a private basis, then you have to try to help them see how that's sort of antithetical to the principle of knowledge management, that knowledge management is about being more open, about being more sharing, about collaborating across organizational boundaries. So if you don't take anything else away from our webinar today, but this idea of move from being more closed to being more open, to working out loud as to working more secretively, then I think that would be a positive benefit. So we've reached the end now. I'm going to turn it back over to Brad.
Thank you, Stan, for the wonderful presentation. We're also very excited to announce that you can download a copy of Stan's latest book, The 5 Cs of KM, which is part of our Lucidea Lens series from our website. And to our audience, if you have any more questions on any of our software or our company, or would like to reach out to Stan, the contact details are on the screen, and please stay tuned for more webinars and content related to this series. On behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending today, and until next time, thanks and goodbye.